Inside a sealed boardroom on the 42nd floor, Lauren Whitmore slid a termination letter across the table and laughed without warmth. No explanation, no warning, no second chance. Just 7 words aimed straight at Nathan Cole like a verdict. "You're finished. Don't come back here again." The room went still. Executives looked away. But what no one in that room understood was this: only minutes earlier, Nathan had spotted something they had all missed, something worth billions, and her cruelty had just set the entire game in motion. Nathan Cole had spent 11 years inside Whitmore Global before the morning everything broke. He knew the logistics network better than anyone on the executive floor, tracked the numbers most directors ignored, and had a habit of disagreeing quietly when the data pointed the other way. That habit had a cost. In a company built around the personality of one woman, being right was not the same as being safe. Lauren Whitmore ran her tower on Park Avenue the way a general ran a siege. Every department reported directly to her. Every contract passed through her office. Every decision that might affect the quarterly number landed on her desk within the hour. Investors called her brilliant. Board members called her difficult. Her employees, when they were honest behind closed doors, called her something colder than either of those words. 2 things in particular had made Nathan dangerous to her, long before anyone in the building realized it. The first was a 12-page analysis he had walked into a senior planning meeting 9 months earlier, showing that a major acquisition target had inflated margins and was about to lose its federal subsidies. He had said it plainly without drama in front of the board. Lauren had thanked him in public and stopped inviting him to meetings in private. The acquisition went through anyway. 6 months later, the subsidies collapsed exactly as he had predicted, and a quiet 9-figure write-down followed. The second was a request he had declined. 3 months before his dismissal, he had been asked to prepare a briefing that would supply the underlying data for a coordinated press effort against a rising regional competitor. The work was routine on paper. The purpose was not. He had sent the request back with a single line about scope and never followed up. He had thought at the time that refusal was the end of the matter. What he did not understand yet was that in Lauren's world, being proven right after the fact and refusing to be useful when asked were not forgotten. They were filed. The morning of the meeting, he was called up 2 hours earlier than the scheduled agenda. The 42nd floor conference room was already full when he walked in. 7 members of the executive board sat along one side. The general counsel sat beside them with a folder closed in front of him. A woman from human resources he did not recognize waited near the door. Lauren sat at the head of the table with that small, practiced smile she used in press photos. There was no presentation, no performance review on the screen, just the termination letter sliding across the polished walnut surface and the single sentence she had prepared for him. "You're finished. Don't come back here again." Nathan reached out, touched the edge of the paper, and did not pick it up. He looked at her for a long moment. Whatever he saw in her face told him everything he needed to know. This had not been decided that morning. This had been decided weeks ago. Security escorted him out through the service elevator. His badge was deactivated before he reached the lobby. By the time the car pulled away from the curb, an internal memo had already circulated to every senior partner in the logistics industry. Nathan Cole was no longer with Whitmore Global. The language was careful. The subtext was not. Within 48 hours, 3 headhunters who had been chasing him for years stopped returning his calls. He spent the first week at home running numbers the way other men might drink. He had savings, a small brokerage account, and a row of credit lines that would hold for maybe a year. He had the quiet, ordinary life of a man who lived alone and preferred it that way. What he did not have was a path forward. Every logistics firm in the country had received the same quiet call. Every door he knocked on closed before it opened. It was during the second week, sorting through old files, he had backed up to a personal drive long before his dismissal, that he found the report again. A small internal memo from 2 years earlier, flagged once and then buried. A distressed industrial complex in the Ohio River corridor. 63 acres of cracked concrete, and failing warehouses owned by a regional operator who had defaulted on his bonds. Nathan had recommended at the time that Whitmore Global acquire it quietly. Lauren had dismissed the idea in under a minute. The site was too far from their existing hubs and needed too much capital to rebuild. What Lauren had not seen, and what Nathan saw clearly now, was the federal infrastructure bill that had passed 18 months after his original memo. 3 new intermodal rail connections were scheduled for that exact corridor within the next 4 years. 2 interstate widening projects had been approved. A proposed inland port was under environmental review, less than 7 miles from the site. The corridor that had been worthless in 2021 was on track to become one of the most valuable logistics arteries in the eastern half of the country. Any operator that wanted to move freight through the eastern interior after 2026 would eventually need to move it through that ground. That last point was the one Lauren had missed, and that Nathan had not. It meant that whoever owned the site did not need to chase customers. Eventually, the customers would come to them, including in time Whitmore Global itself. The asset was still on the market, still unwanted, still priced as a failed warehouse instead of a future distribution hub. The seller was 6 months from foreclosure and willing to negotiate with almost anyone who arrived with a reasonable offer. Nathan calculated what it would take. Every dollar he had, every line of credit he could pull a partner willing to match him, and roughly 2 years of operating losses before the first rail project broke ground. He sat with the numbers until the sun came up. He had 2 choices, and he understood both of them clearly. He could accept what Lauren had done to him, quietly spend the next decade rebuilding a career in some smaller, safer industry, and live with the knowledge that she had won. Or he could put everything he had into a piece of land that no one else believed in and bet his entire future on a single conviction. That conviction was simple. He had seen what no one else had seen. He had been right before, and he had been punished for it. This time, if he was right again, he would not be standing on someone else's floor when the truth arrived. By 7 in the morning, he had made the call to the broker. By noon, he had drafted the offer. He did not know yet how he would raise the rest of the money. He did not know who, if anyone, would stand beside him. He only knew that the woman who had told him he was finished had made one mistake she did not yet understand. She had given him nothing left to lose, and a man with nothing left to lose was the last kind of opponent Lauren Whitmore should have wanted in the world. The broker accepted his offer within a week, but closing the deal required capital Nathan did not have. He had liquidated what he could and pulled every line of credit available to him. It wasn't enough. The remainder needed a partner who believed in infrastructure timelines longer than most investors could tolerate, and who would not take a phone call from Lauren Whitmore as a warning against doing business with anyone she had touched. There was only one man Nathan could think of. Harold Bennett had built his fortune in the 1980s, acquiring rail yards and cold storage facilities when the rest of the industry was chasing containerized shipping. He was 71 years old, semi-retired, and famously difficult. He had also been one of the few private investors Lauren had never been able to intimidate. Nathan called his Connecticut office, was refused twice, and on the 3rd attempt was told to fly out that Friday at 10 in the morning. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. Nathan walked Harold through the federal bill, the rail connections, the environmental timeline on the inland port, and the foreclosure position of the current owner. He did not oversell. He did not promise returns inside 3 years. He laid the evidence on the table and waited. "You're asking me to bet against Lauren Whitmore publicly," Harold said at the end, reading the last page of the memo twice before setting it down. "You understand what she does to people who embarrass her?" "I understand better than most," Nathan replied. Harold studied him for a long moment. Then he opened a drawer, pulled out a pen, and wrote a number on the back of Nathan's own document. $8 million. Combined with Nathan's own capital, it was enough to close the purchase, hold the asset for 18 months, and begin the first phase of structural repair. Harold did not shake his hand when Nathan rose to leave. He only said, If you're wrong about the corridor, we both go down. If you're right, she does. They broke ground on a cold Tuesday in early March. What Nathan found inside the warehouses was worse than the inspection reports had suggested. 2 of the 6 primary structures had compromised roof systems. The rail spur connecting the complex to the main line had been decommissioned without notice 4 years earlier. The electrical grid on the eastern side of the property failed its first certification test. Every week, a new line item appeared on the budget that had not existed the week before. The contractors who agreed to work with him were second tier. The best regional firms declined quietly without explanation. One of them, a construction group he had used twice before while he was still at Whitmore, sent a short letter saying their schedule was full for the year. Nathan knew what it meant. The same calls that had ended his career in Manhattan were still being made now in different cities to different men about a different kind of problem. He had no anchor clients. He had nothing to put on a brochure. He spent the spring driving a rental car between mid-sized warehouses, meeting with freight forwarders who had never heard his name pitching storage and cross-dock services on month-to-month terms. He signed a $30,000 contract with a regional grocery distributor. He signed another for $18,000 with a furniture importer. He hired a skeleton crew of 12 men, mostly local, most of whom had worked the old warehouses under the previous owner. By the end of the 4th month, operating losses had consumed nearly a third of Harold's investment. Nathan had not drawn a salary since the firing. He ate at the site. He slept in a modular office trailer 3 nights a week to save the driving time. Harold called on the 1st of each month, reviewed the numbers, and said very little. The only thing keeping them both in the game was the timeline on the Federal Rail project, which was still holding. By the end of the 8th month, something changed. The cross-dock service he had built around a handful of small clients started running at 86% capacity. His turnaround times measured against regional benchmarks came in 31% below industry average. He had written a proprietary scheduling system during the evenings in the trailer. He had trained his 12-man crew into 28. A mid-tier retailer signed a 2-year agreement at the beginning of the 10th month. A pharmaceutical distributor signed a 3-year deal 4 weeks later. The complex still looked from the highway like a ruin. Inside, the numbers were beginning to tell a different story, one Nathan had believed from the start, but no one outside his crew had seen. The turn, when it came, was not a coincidence. It was the exact consequence of what he had been betting on from the beginning. The same federal infrastructure program that had made his site valuable also made Whitmore Global's existing eastern footprint obsolete. Their main corridor hubs were being bypassed by the new rail lines. Their trucking network was tied to interstate segments that were about to be widened and rerouted. To stay relevant in the East, Whitmore Global had to push into the corridor where Nathan's assets sat. Not wanted to. Had to. Her own executives had reached that conclusion before the second rail project was announced. Lauren had pushed the expansion timeline forward, thinking she could find any partner on the corridor other than him. The first outside notice came from a trade publication that ran a small column on emerging logistics operators in the Ohio region. His name appeared in paragraph 4. 3 days after that column ran, he received a phone call from a woman named Carolyn Reyes, director of strategic sourcing at a national retailer he had competed against for years. She had a simple question. Could he handle 80,000 square feet of dedicated capacity for their Northeast expansion? Available inside 6 months, he could. What Nathan did not know, and what Caroline did not say, was that her retailer was only one of several companies now circling the same ground. Inside Whitmore Global, a junior analyst named David Ortiz had pulled capacity data from every independent operator within a 100-mile radius of the new rail projects. The analysis was routine. The results were not. Nathan's site ranked first on 6 of the 7 criteria. It ranked first on price. It ranked first on turnaround. It ranked first on projected expansion capacity. David flagged the anomaly, copied his immediate supervisor, and went home that night thinking he had done good work. By the following morning, word had reached the executive floor. a logistics asset that Whitmore Global had specifically declined to acquire 2 years earlier, that Lauren Whitmore had personally killed in a meeting, was now the top-ranked independent partner for the one expansion push her own strategy team had described as non-negotiable. And the man running it was the same man she had thrown out of the building with a single sentence. The executive floor did not panic. It froze. Nathan's name was not supposed to appear on any internal document ever again. That was understood. Yet the numbers were the numbers. A senior vice president named Margaret Hollis walked the report into Lauren's office, personally closed the door behind her, and explained carefully what had happened. Lauren read the first page. She read the second page. She did not read the third. "Find a different partner," Lauren said. Margaret held her ground. "The data doesn't support that, and we don't have a second option that keeps us on schedule." "The data doesn't make the decision," Lauren replied. "I do." That sentence was the first real crack inside the walls of Whitmore Global, and the first moment in almost a year that the company's own executives began to wonder whether the woman at the top was choosing the right fight for the right reasons. Lauren's decision did not stay quiet. Inside a tower of 700 employees, the story of a data-driven report killed for personal reasons traveled down 3 floors before the end of the week. The official partner selection went to a mid-sized operator 200 miles south of Nathan's site, with lower rankings on every metric that mattered. The contract was announced in a short press release. Margaret asked to be reassigned from the expansion committee within the month. She was not the only one who noticed. What followed against Nathan was not accidental. Within 2 weeks, a trade newsletter published a lightly sourced piece questioning the financial stability of his operation. A second publication picked up the story and added specific, unverified claims about missed vendor payments. A third ran a longer piece implying that his contracts were being subsidized by a single undisclosed investor whose motives were political rather than commercial. None of it was true. All of it moved. Nathan understood the shape of the campaign within the first 48 hours. The sources were different. The cadence was not. He had seen Lauren do this from the inside to 2 other competitors during his time at Whitmore. He knew how the calls were made, which consultants placed them, and which public relations firm in Chicago handled the delivery. He knew because 3 months before his dismissal, he had been the one asked to prepare the underlying briefing for exactly this kind of operation. He had refused. That refusal, he now understood, had been the moment his file was closed upstairs. The grocery distributor who had signed one of his earliest contracts called first. They needed 30 days to review his balance sheet before renewing. The furniture importer followed, asking for the same. Caroline Reyes did not call him at all. She called Harold Bennett. By the end of that week, 3 contracts were on hold, 1 was canceled outright, and Nathan's monthly projections dropped by almost 40%. Harold flew out to Ohio on a Sunday. They walked the property together in the late afternoon. Harold did not raise his voice. He never raised his voice. He simply said that the investment was now exposed in ways neither of them had modeled, and that if Nathan could not stabilize revenue inside the next 90 days, Harold's other partners would force him to write down the position. "I understand," Nathan said. "I'm not asking you to understand," Harold replied. "I'm asking you what you plan to do about it." Nathan had 90 days. He had a facility running at half the capacity it needed, a reputation being eroded in publications he could not answer through, and a primary investor whose patience was measured in financial quarters rather than personal loyalty. The best logistics professionals in the region still would not return his calls. 2 of his own men he had personally hired quietly took positions elsewhere during the 2nd month of the smear campaign. He did not blame them. He did not replace them. In the 6th week after the first article, the mid-tier retailer that had signed a 2-year agreement exercised an early termination clause. Their stated reason was internal restructuring. Their actual reason had arrived by phone from a consultant in Chicago. The pharmaceutical distributor delayed its first shipment, then delayed it again. A fourth trade publication ran a piece calling his site a cautionary tale without naming him, then describing him in enough detail that no reader could miss who was meant. On the last Friday of the second month, his operations manager brought him the weekly numbers in person, rather than sending them by email. The site was losing money at a rate that would exhaust Harold's reserve inside 60 days. Payroll was intact through the following pay period and no longer. 2 of the secondary structures still required repair work that had been budgeted 6 months earlier and never begun. Nathan read the report without expression and signed it. That night, he stood alone on the loading dock of the main warehouse long after the last truck had pulled out. The corridor was quiet. The highway beyond the fence hummed at a distance. He thought about the 42nd floor conference room. He thought about the sentence Lauren had prepared for him almost a year earlier. He thought about how patient she had been, and how little patience anyone in his position was ever allowed. Everything she had said that morning appeared from where he was standing to be coming true. The industry had closed around him. The money was running out. The woman who had told him he was finished was about to be proven right on the only timeline that mattered to the people who kept score. And somewhere inside the tower on Park Avenue, Nathan knew she was already preparing to collect. He did not go home that night. He walked back into the main office, turned on the lights, and sat down at the one desk in the building that still had a full set of spreadsheets on its hard drive. The question in front of him was the one Harold had asked that afternoon. What do you plan to do about it? He had already begun to know the answer before Harold's car had left the gate. Retreat was possible. He could sell the asset for parts to a regional operator before the smear campaign finished its work. He would lose most of Harold's money. He would lose everything of his own. He would, however, walk away with his name attached to a real business for a while longer, and that was worth something in certain markets. It was the quiet option. It was the one Lauren expected. The other option was harder to describe cleanly. It meant taking the same tools Lauren had used against him and turning them around. Not with rumors, not with leaks, with facts, with a record of who had made which call on which date to which publication, and what had been said, with a financial analysis that showed to any neutral reader what the correct partner decision inside Whitmore Global had been, and what the personal cost of the wrong decision would reach over the next 3 fiscal quarters. He began building the file that night. He did not sleep. He pulled the 2 years of operating data his own team had gathered, benchmarked it against the public filings of the partner Whitmore had chosen, and laid the gap out in clear numbers. The partner Lauren had selected was already missing delivery windows. Their first quarter costs were running 14% over projection. Their own board would be reviewing the contract in less than 90 days. He then turned to the smear campaign. He did not need to guess where the calls had originated. During his last year at Whitmore, he had quietly kept personal copies of internal correspondence that touched on reputation management out of a habit he no longer needed to justify. None of it was confidential client material. All of it was email between Whitmore executives and their public relations counsel in Chicago. One thread in particular, from 3 months before his dismissal, the same thread that had ended with his refusal, laid out the exact playbook that had since been run against him. Same publications, same sequencing, same language. By sunrise, he had 2 documents. The first was for Harold, a clean summary of the financial exposure and the path back to stability. The second was sharper written for a different audience. That second document was not intended for Lauren. Lauren was beyond reason at this point. It was intended for the 7 people on the Whitmore Global Board of Directors who did not answer to her on a daily basis, and for one of them in particular. Richard Halloway had joined the board 2 years earlier as an independent director after 30 years running a competing logistics firm on the West Coast. He had known Nathan by reputation from across the industry. He had never been part of Lauren's inner circle. He was by design of the company's own governance charter, one of the 3 board members whose vote could be cast without consulting the chief executive. Nathan sent the full package to Richard at 7 in the morning by overnight courier, unmarked through Harold's attorney. He did not call. He did not email. He waited. 3 days passed. The facility kept operating on fumes. On the 4th day, Richard called Harold directly. The conversation lasted an hour. On the 6th day, a special session of the Whitmore Global Audit Committee was convened, without Lauren present, citing a governance inquiry into recent competitive decisions. By the 8th day, the full board had reviewed Nathan's materials, the comparison financials on the chosen partner, and the email chain from 3 months before his dismissal. On the 10th day, Nathan received a short formal note from Richard's office. It asked him to be available the following morning in New York at a specific address for a private meeting regarding a matter he was already familiar with. The address was the tower on Park Avenue. The floor number was 42. He flew in that night. The boardroom on the 11th day was arranged differently than he remembered it. The long oval table had been turned so that the head now faced the windows. 7 directors sat along the far side. Richard had a bound report in front of him. The chair at the near end of the table was empty, waiting for Lauren. Nathan was asked to sit along the wall as a witness. Lauren walked in expecting a routine quarterly review. She saw Nathan first. Whatever she had prepared to say when she walked into the room did not come out of her mouth. "You made a partner selection 6 months ago that has cost this company $19 million in avoidable operating losses," Richard said to her, setting the report down without opening it. "You did so against the recommendation of your own analyst, against the recommendation of your own senior vice president, and against documentary evidence from your finance department. I would like to hear your explanation." Lauren's answer was short. "The chosen partner aligned with our long-term relationship strategy." Richard opened the report to a tabbed page. "The chosen partner is going to miss its next delivery milestone by 21 days. I have their own internal memo in front of me. You also authorized a coordinated press effort to destabilize the independent operator that ranked first on your internal evaluation. That operator was your former employee. I have the correspondence for that as well." He turned the page toward her. The top of the sheet was one of her own emails dated 3 months before Nathan's dismissal, instructing the Chicago firm on the exact cadence of trade publication placements. She read it without moving. The hand that had slid the termination letter across the table a year earlier rested flat on the walnut, this time fingers apart. The room did not need to go further. 2 of the remaining 6 directors followed Richard's line of questioning. A third called for a formal vote of no confidence before the meeting ended. By the time Lauren left the building that evening, she had been suspended from the role of chief executive, pending a full governance investigation. A senior deputy was installed as interim. A forensic review of competitive decisions going back 18 months was authorized by unanimous vote. Nathan did not speak during the meeting. He did not need to. On his way out, he walked past the chair Lauren had risen from. He did not look at it. He had come to the tower one more time for a single reason, and that reason had been accomplished the moment he sat down along the wall instead of standing in front of the table. The story broke in 2 business publications the following morning. The industry read it twice. The most telling detail to anyone paying attention was not Lauren's suspension. It was the quiet announcement 3 pages in on the second publication that a national shipping conglomerate unaffiliated with Whitmore Global had just signed a 7-year strategic partnership with an independent logistics facility in the Ohio River corridor. The operator's name was mentioned only once, toward the end, Nathan Cole. The conglomerate had been watching his numbers since the trade publication piece 8 months earlier. They had waited quietly to see whether the facility could survive the pressure now being publicly documented. Once the board action inside Whitmore made the shape of that pressure clear, their decision became straightforward. A representative flew out to Ohio the day the news broke. The contract was drafted within a week. It anchored Nathan's operation with a volume commitment that dwarfed every contract he had held before, at terms that allowed him to hire back his lost crew and finish the structural repairs inside a single quarter. Harold Bennett did not say much when Nathan called him with the news. He simply made the short sound he made when a long trade finally cleared and told Nathan to come out to Connecticut for dinner when the paperwork was signed. The 3 contracts that had been placed on hold during the smear campaign returned one by one over the following month. Caroline Reyes was the first to call back. She did not apologize. She did not need to. Nathan signed her paperwork the same week. 2 people from inside Whitmore reached out to Nathan during that same stretch. Margaret Hollis called from an airport on her last day at the company, said a single sentence that sounded like an apology, and was not, and asked whether he was hiring. He told her to come see him. She did 2 weeks later and ran the operations side of his company for the next 4 years. David Ortiz, the junior analyst, who had flagged the original capacity report, arrived without an appointment on a Thursday morning in spring and asked for 5 minutes. Nathan gave him the afternoon, and by the end of it, a job. The facility that had looked from the highway like a ruin 18 months earlier now operated at full capacity across all 6 primary structures. The second phase of repairs was completed within the year. The rail spur was recertified and connected to the main line 3 weeks before the first federal project broke ground 4 miles to the east. The inland port under environmental review cleared its final hurdle the following summer. Every forecast Nathan had written in his kitchen at 2 a.m. had on its own schedule become the present tense. He did not stop there. With the anchor contract secured and his credit position restored, he began building the model the industry had not yet seen. He acquired 2 smaller distressed sites within a 50-mile radius, linked them to the main complex through a shared scheduling protocol, and opened the network to mid-sized shippers on terms no national operator would match. Within 2 years, the operation handled more than 80% of corridor freight volume on the new rail line. Within 3, it had written the benchmarks other operators were measured against. By the 4th year, the network spanned 9 integrated sites across 3 states, with a combined workforce larger than the division inside Whitmore Global he had once reported through. He signed a national supply agreement with a major automotive parts distributor that alone exceeded the total revenue of the operator Lauren had chosen as his replacement. He was not the biggest operator in the market. He was the one the biggest operators called when they needed the work done on a schedule that mattered. He did not rename the company. He did not put his face on the front of a magazine. He kept building 1 site and 1 contract at a time on the same discipline that had built the first one. The man who had been walked out of a tower in Manhattan with a single sentence now set the terms on which national carriers moved through half the eastern freight market. The governance investigation at Whitmore Global concluded the following spring. Its findings went further than Lauren's defenders had expected. 2 additional partner decisions over the preceding 3 years were found to have been made for reasons unsupported by any internal analysis. A separate review by outside counsel flagged the Chicago public relations arrangement as a pattern of conduct rather than an isolated incident. The board removed her formally, clawed back the prior year's performance compensation, and accepted a settlement with a small group of institutional shareholders that required a full independent chair of the board going forward. She was barred under the settlement from serving as a director of any public company for 5 years. Whitmore Global continued under new leadership at a quieter valuation. The industry, when it spoke of that period, did not dwell on her name. It dwelled on his. Success did not depend on being recognized in the moment. It depended on whether a person could see value before the rest of the market had agreed on it and hold that position long enough for the truth to arrive. Power could remove a man from a system. It could lock every door he had once walked through. What it could not do was prevent him from building another system with different doors, on different terms, with his own name on the lease. Nathan Cole had been told he was finished by a woman who controlled the only tower he had ever worked inside. A year and a half later, the tower was still standing, but the rules had moved. They had moved because one man with nothing left to lose had done exactly what he had always done quietly and without apology. He had looked at the numbers, he had trusted what they said, and he had waited for the rest of the world to catch up.